Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 339 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we are going to talk about the UPS improvements that I made, and also the version 2 of the reactor patterns that we need to upgrade our factory with. Enjoy! Before we continue, I'd like to update you that I did go through with the computer upgrade because, of course, the factory must grow, and it's kind of triggering to watch a video that's not going at 60 frames per second all the time. So looking at the debug information here, the main thing when figuring out like the speed of the computer is to look at the update time and how long that takes, because ultimately you have 16.6 milliseconds up here at the frame cycle in order to update the game, and if you can't make that, then the UPS goes down. But I upgraded the CPU that I previously had, a 10900K, which I bought in 2020 during COVID times when you could barely get anything that wasn't scalped, and that was the best I can get. But it's a little old. It was a little old then. It's a little old now, but I upgraded to a 7800 X3D, and I was hearing from people that that CPU, especially the V-Cache in particular, was especially good for games like Factorio and KSP, like simulation type of games. It's not as useful for normal games. It's probably it's a very good CPU for any kind of game, but it's not as exceptional as it would be for something like Factorio. And I was guessing that it would be at least twice as fast, if not 2.5 times faster, and that's about what we see, where the update time is around 6 or 7, and you need to do the update within 16.6. So it definitely is at least twice as fast. So what that means is the factory can essentially get about twice as big as it is now without running into more limits. And I haven't really done too much configuring of the CPU. Like, this is a water-cooled computer, which takes both a lot of time to set up and also a lot of time to configure to see exactly what you can get out of the CPU, and also just what kind of heat and noise you want to deal with. So I haven't done any of those tests, so I might even be able to get a little bit more performance out of the CPU. Like, people were saying that it's a really hot CPU, but I don't agree with that, because right now it's at 49 degrees. So that's not what I would call a hot CPU. And in fact, it's about 5 degrees cooler than the 10900 was in this exact same computer and exact same cooling solution. So take that how you will. But that's great. I was kind of worried there about that slowdown, but that's why I bought that CPU, is because I knew that this day was coming, that it was only a matter of time before the factory would hit the UPS limit, and we need to do something about that. But if I recall, the last thing that we were dealing with was some brownout problems and running out of power. I wasn't expecting that so soon we would need to upgrade our reactor setups. But that's where we are. Something I wasn't really paying attention to. If you look at our electronic processing board setup, it uses 1.8 gigawatts. And that's just this setup. It does not include any of the machines that make the supporting components. So doing those module changes definitely is going to increase the power consumption of the factory by a significant amount. So we're going to lean in a lot more heavily than I thought we were into these reactors. And while I was testing the new CPU and everything, I did make a new, more compact blueprint that has more functionality than the one we have now, because I couldn't help myself. But first, we need to work on these better heat exchangers, because now that we have tungsten, we can make all of the purple tiers of these various components. So before we build this, we kind of need to make those. So we'll switch this over to tungsten, add a new warning for the same, and finally negative 512 of tungsten plates, and that will probably nuke our tungsten supply for a little while, but it's still doing okay. 75,000, and that number is going to have to get down basically below everything else, and then once it does, then we'll start using the crystallizers. It might be a smart idea to just force the crystallizers to make tungsten, but we're going to get to that point before too long anyway, so I'm not too worried about that. And oh yeah, our battery is at 5%. It looks like we're really low. There's the tungsten, but we have some extra personal batteries to throw in here. And now we have been upgraded, and each one of these Holds 750 megajoules, so that's an insane increase over what we had before. And standing on the charge pad, we can see how fast it charges. So 4%, 5%, 6%. This is going to take a while. I'll have to get that done somewhere when we're standing around, but yeah. It's definitely a little too much for the induction coil, but we're not quite at the point of using the personal fusion reactors quite yet. But nonetheless, this will go for hours, and then we'll have to stand around for a while. But okay, we need a new item on here. I don't think we necessarily need to add purple to everything, because I'm not sure how often it would come up. We pretty much never use regular boilers or fluid burning boilers anymore. They're all heat sources, and we actually don't have the upgraded version of the heat source yet. So really, we just need the heat exchanger, which will come on here, and it looks like the reactors are online and going, but that seems to be normal operation now. Okay, let's put another one on there. We can do direct insertion, better power poles. Let's switch the recipe to purple. Put that in there, but we don't need the heat exchangers. And we do want everything else, but tungsten is not available yet. And I'm wondering, are ceramic pipes being made somewhere here? Or they just so happen to be in the junk warehouse and that's where they're coming from? So, ceramic pipes. No results, so we're not doing it. We do want to make the pipes, and there's space here, so let's just request like 200 of the stuff, because this machine is probably pretty fast. And all of the pipes can go in there. And then we'll just need 2 inputs where we can get them. And there's actually not much space here, but I think these 2 on the ends are available. And then we need a new line. I guess it would be after the batteries. A line of bots. There we go. Oh yeah, we actually do need to have a limiter on this because we don't want to make a ton of these. But we do want quite a few. So how about like 200? Okay, looks like the plates got delivered. That was pretty fast, but I guess it would be because we have all these stack inserters now. I completely missed the train arriving and leaving. It delivered so fast. Let's see, is tungsten the kind of thing we'd want to have in our inventory for handcrafting? Yeah, to an extent. It's not used in that much, but who knows? Might actually want some of it, so just kind of sucks when you need to make like one machine of something. And then you find out that you don't have a resource that you need, and then you just can't build it. Those biters are still a problem. I wonder what the pollution cloud looks like. Well, that's probably why that no matter where they are, it's essentially reaching them. That even clearing them out this far wasn't enough. So we kind of need to upgrade our technology or push the walls out further. But I'm kind of thinking the best solution to this might be... What is going on there? It's like they go to the exact same spot every time. But I'm thinking we kind of need to just rebuild the wall. We need, obviously, more and better turrets. But also, probably want to go away from this ammo belt because it keeps getting polluted by orbs when this happens. So if we just used robots for all of the logistics requests, it would be annoying that the robots would be working harder. But on the other hand, the orbs couldn't get stuck in the chest like that. But it could be a situation where we use like buffer chests to get them close to the wall and then take them the rest of the way. But yeah, clearly... the biters are becoming a problem. It's interesting how they're just chilling out here, but tungsten got here, and now we have our heat exchangers. So we have everything that we need to upgrade our reactor setups. So the factory doesn't get completely destroyed when we rebuild it. Let's leave the existing one there, and then build the new design next to it. And then once the new design is there, we can remove the old one and replace it with the new design again. Let's hop into Hellmod real quick here and see what the balance is. that when we had one reactor, we needed to have 15 heat exchangers and 30 turbines, and it used 1,800 water. But our previous heat exchanger could only go up to 465, even though the turbines can go higher than that. So, if we back it out and say we want our 615 degree steam, and we need to switch this to heat exchanger, now we only need 11.25, and then we put the turbine there, and now that it's running at the turbine's maximum temperature, we only need 1350 water to do the same thing, and less machines. So ultimately, we basically need like 11 heat exchangers and 22 turbines, and I think that's the ratio that I went with. The ultimate power output of this setup is going to be the same. It's just smaller and less water now that we are running at the correct steam temperature, but it also changes some other aspects of it, which we can cover in a second. Uh-oh. Biters are still breaking stuff. Yeah, that's going to be something we need to fix pretty soon here. I kind of want to just stop producing items, or at least major pollution producing items for a while, to give time for this massive pollution cloud to dissipate. But let's come through here again. Clear out another line. But it's going to take up a lot less space, so it's not as much of an issue. Nonetheless, let's pull out a whole bunch of this stuff. And we can grab the blueprint for now. So I'll place it down and then we can talk about it. I would like to basically use the same pipe, but the positioning of it is a little weird, so we might just have to do things a little differently. That's fine, we'll just use this spot right here instead, because there is a pipe connection. So if we put it right in here, it will connect, and it should still use those pumps, and then we can test the system. But the idea is the same, where water comes in on the top and the bottom and then gets shot up and down into the reactor setup. And it's also a 4-reactor setup, but I smushed it down way tighter when you look at this, that it's about the same left to right, but about half of the height up and down. And that makes sense because the left and the right size doesn't really change much. That's just a design thing, but the up and down part changes based on having less steam turbines because of everything being higher temperature and denser. So this setup is a little more complicated than the other one. It essentially works basically the same way, but it has more supporting components and it's more flexible when it comes to low fuel situations in preparation for burning plutonium, which we very well might need to do just to keep the factory powered. And it's got some Nixie tubes here to display relevant information. And one disadvantage to it is it's so dense that you can't actually easily walk through it once everything's all set up. I do like setups having those gaps so you can walk, but at the same time, I couldn't help myself in squishing it down as much as I could get away with. And it'll just be connected with its substations to the other logic, which does seem like it's basically working, because accumulators are supplying a little bit of power right now. So each pipe, every time it passes a reactor, would be kind of like this, where it would cover 2 reactors on the top and 2 reactors on the bottom. So even though it's powering 2 halves of 2 different sides, it's still powering one set every time it goes through one of these. So we can calculate it kind of based on the same numbers. So to power one, it would require 5,400 water, and each pipe can do 72,000, which means, let's say we can get 13 setups. And we can kind of figure out how big that would be just by using these tanks here. So if that's 1, we know we need another 6 above, and also 6 below. And looks like that would just barely fit in the surface area, but that does tell us kind of how much landfill we would need to use. So maybe to like right here. So now if we take this thing, we can fit it right there. And now they should all layer on. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And the same thing down here. 3, 4, 5, 6. So much water. And we can just put some substations in there to get everything covered. And can't forget about these charge pads. Got to stand on one whenever we can to get this energy charged up. And on the end, replace the straight sections with the curved ones. Okay. The reactor's all here. So let's talk about the changes made to version 2 here. First, it still has the power switch, like the other ones. And it still uses the idea that it needs 4 on signals for the inserters to swing. And we're still waiting on the inventory sensor to get here. But it pulls the signal out. One looks at the amount of fuel left in the reactor. Instead of being 0, it's below 50. This will give time for the inserters to swing. So instead of running at 99.9% of the time, they can run at 100%. So just before the cell is done, it's allowed to swing if it wants to. The other is the temperature, and this is actually a special consideration now that we have the higher heat exchangers, because their minimum temperature to run went up, where previously it was 465, so now it is 615, which means we have to keep the average temperature higher, and the maximum temperature of the reactor is still 1000. So what it means is the higher the tier of heat exchangers that you get, the more difficult it will be and the more careful you will have to be in order to avoid wasting fuel, because you'll have to be running closer to the max temp limit of the reactor to effectively produce power. So I guess we just don't have any of these inventory sensors. So there we go, because I want to get these numbers updated. But the other signal, instead of having the belt that moves around, now each inserter will get its own requester chest, and this will avoid the problem of the belt being partially full, but the chest just receiving a logistics request, and then causing some of the inserters to swing. So now what happens is each chest has a combinator, and it looks like the wires aren't attached, but we can do that here. Everything's really close together, so it can be kind of hard to see what's going on. But what these combinators are doing is they're just checking, is there fuel in the chest? Doesn't matter how much, just is there one? And if there isn't fuel, it does not send its signal. And its signal is just simply one uranium fuel cell. They go on the green wire, and then the green wire goes into the last combinator that checks, do I have 4 fuel cells? In other words, are all 4 reactors reporting that they have fuel? If not, no one's allowed to turn on. So what this means is that you can have a factory that has partial supply of fuel, and any reactors that all are supplied with fuel can turn on, but any of them that don't will wait until their fuel will arrive. And this isn't that particularly relevant for uranium, since we can make a ton of uranium reliably. It's more for plutonium later on. So I'm trying to prepare for the future by doing it in this way. But basically it means that we don't have to worry about any kind of logistics problems also causing problems for the reactors, that they will just work. And of course they have their active provider chests for their fuel cells. And now they have a filter attached to them, because for a split second there will be 2 fuel cells in there. It's possible it can pick up the good fuel cell if we don't have that. And the final on condition is simply that the power switch is turned on. And you can hover over these to see how many signals we have, and we have 2 signals because the requester chests do not have any fuel in them. So let's do that. This is 235, and yeah, we should probably request 50. In a way, 50 is probably too much. Like, we could probably get away with 10, but the problem there is that it's actually possible that a logistics backup could cause problems, especially when you consider that all 4 of the reactors must have fuel for any of them to turn on. So having it like, let's say 5 or 10 might be pushing it a little close to the line. And it's also not that difficult to make fuel cells, so we should probably just do a stack. Well, and you've probably noticed our Nixie tubes here. They are both identical on the left and the right, and in fact they're even pulling off of the same inventory sensor on this reactor, the top right one. The reason why I have 2 is because depending on exactly which direction the wind blows, that the steam is very likely to block at least one of these, if not both sides. They can be quite hard to read when this is going at full blast. That is a disadvantage of having everything so close together like this, is it can be very hard to see. I don't know if there's like a key you can press to make the steam effects go away without, you know, going into the graphic settings and turning steam off so you can see through. But this is the quickest solution here, where the number on the top, the smaller Nixie tubes, these are the 2-digit displays, says the amount of megajoules of fuel in the reactor. And before, when it was running, it was kind of hard to tell. I had to like hover over it. You might not have noticed that I was like looking at this little square right here to see what the fuel level is. Now you can just look at this top number, which will say how much fuel is remaining in the reactor. And then the middle number is the temperature of the reactor. And this bottom one is a new one. It is the temperature of the furthest away heat exchanger, which is down here. So if one of the heat exchangers isn't going to work because the temperature is too low, it's going to be the last one. And that's what this signal is right here. So what you can do is use this to see what's the current temperature of the reactor and what's the lowest temperature at the end of the heat pipe to see how high do we need to get the reactor for all of the heat exchangers to reliably have power. And this is basically a diagnostic tool. And the last thing right here is just a combinator looking at the temperature of that last heat exchanger. And it requires 615 to produce power, but if it's running right at 615, it might not be making full power. So you can see on this one, it's at, if you look down there, it's at 712 degrees, but the minimum is 465. If it was at 465, it might not be making full power. So what this combinator is doing is checking to see if the temperature is below 620. If it is, it's giving us a red light, and that red light says the reactor setup is not hot enough to produce maximum power. So ideally this light would never be on, but right now it's on because the whole setup is off. And one advantage of this is that the total amount of heat pipes is less. So if we look at this, we needed 35 heat pipes to get to the very last heat exchanger. But here, if we just follow it to the end, we only need 22. So the heat loss on the pipes is going to be a lot less with this setup. And the closer you get to running the red line, the more important that is. So since these things have to go up to 615, it's important that we do that. And through previous testing, I determined that if you have the reactors up to about 800, that should reliably power these things. So they're not actually going to make any electricity when we fire it up because the accumulators are doing great again, because we're not producing anything in effort to make the pollution cloud go away, but it's not. Ouch. We might just have to solve that problem by removing biters. We're not really ready for that yet because we can't make uranium ammo. But anyway, we now have 3 green signals, and you can see we have the 4 fuel cell signals. So that says that everything is ready to go, so when we flip the switch, we will see the temperature increase. So there we go, they insert. This is our current fuel level, and this is temperature reactor and temperature at the end of the line. And I tried to place these in such a way where the wires minimally cross the numbers, but this is the best I can do. But at least you don't have to like hover over this and look at that anymore. But you can see how it needs to be about 100 degrees higher before it gets to the end. And right when it hits 50, boom, they swing. That prevents the setup from stopping running, even for that split second. So now the reactor is warm enough for electricity, but not at the very end yet. But certainly these heat exchangers at the very beginning will get to minimum temperature before too long. And there they go, at least the beginning ones. And we're just about 615 in the back. The reactor swings one more time. And you see how it gets to 615, but it kind of stops for a little while? That's because it needs to create steam all the way through its turbines. And then once it catches up, then the temperature goes up. So now we exceed 800, and it will no longer swing to heat up the reactors anymore because now it's good to go. And there it goes. Now the numbers will balance out, and it looks like we're going to get one more swing out of this. which will be a good test to make sure that it doesn't overload. Because once it goes below 800, we'll get one more go. It's very close, which this is probably the worst case scenario for making sure that we don't go over on fuel. By basically getting it just to 800 and then putting a little bit more fuel in there. Man, that's close. I mean, the temperature's going down, just not very fast. Kind of want to test it. What if I can do that by picking up a heat pipe and putting it back? There we go. Just to take a little bit of heat out of the system. So let's see if it goes to 999. It looks like it kind of will. Man, that's close. But it didn't. Which means under the worst case situation, the reactor will not waste any fuel. If we had the one tier higher of heat exchangers, then it probably would. But at least in this situation, it can get blazing hot with these settings and just not waste anything. But this is kind of an extreme situation because most of the time, when the reactors are running, it's because you actually need electricity, and then that's sucking heat out of it, so you don't have to dump every last little bit of heat into the system without getting rid of any of it. But that's the setup, and the great thing about this design is that because it is considering the status of these requester chests, then you don't actually have to worry about flipping the power switch on and off. You can just copy and paste it with the power switch on, and it'll just turn on when everything lines up. But nonetheless, probably should turn the switch off anyway just to be safe. But what are we looking at for our output again? Well, we need to max this out because we already had the 24 reactors and it wasn't enough. So we need to change the input to 60 per second. And also we need to start burning plutonium, but we don't quite have enough of it yet in order to start using it as a fuel. Because we have 30 pieces and we need approximately 50 to get this process started, and then it's going to extremely rapidly fill up because at full blast our setup will essentially be able to make 6.7 plutonium every second. It's going to be pretty crazy. So once the minimum amount is reached, it will quickly explode. I shouldn't use that word because plutonium actually does that, not explode. The numbers will explode upwards. But taking these full numbers into account, we need to have 46 reactors. So 46.67 divided by 4 because they're in groups of 4. And that means we'll need approximately 12 setups. So either 12 setups side by side like this, or in a line like this. Probably side by side is going to make a lot more sense because 12 of these in a line is going to go way down here. But side by side, they're actually going to be much more compact. And in fact, we might even be able to do like 3 of them next to each other because of how much narrower they are now. And the pipes don't care. As long as we have this number of offshore pumps, then it means that pretty much no matter what we do with it, it's going to be maxed out. So we probably should just do that. That would mean we would do 4 deep and 3 wide. So let's see what that looks like. We can just slam these right next to each other to make them as compact as possible. Although having little gaps every once in a while might be nice for just some amount of walking, but does it even matter when it's not even physically possible? Well, just barely to walk through here. Certainly not on the ends you can't. But yeah, it's one space to give up, so we probably should put it in there just to make walking not an absolute pain. So we have 1, 2, and the third one. And hey, the reactor is actually on now. And you can kind of see where I put those Nixie tubes on both sides because with all the steam it can be kind of hard to tell. But once it's running, the temperature in the pipes goes way down. And this is set at 800 because it needs to have some amount of buffer in there. What are the actual batteries at? Oh, it's filling up, so I guess it's gonna top off before too long. But oh, the reason why it's running is because some of the wires crossed. Well, I suppose we can still check that anyway. Because it went to 800, it put fuel in, and it's warming up. You can see how the pipe temperature is still going down. and it turns off. Temperature kind of decreases a little bit, and it fires up. So we might be able to knock this down to like 750 and have it still work correctly, but we tested it under the worst possible situation and it seems to not be wasting any heat. So I'd rather not push it close. But where are these wires? Right there. It's kind of funny seeing the reactors heat up without anything really being attached to them. But concept is the same, and I think this design is pretty cool in the sense where you really don't have to micromanage it. You just place the pattern, walk away, and then it will not mess anything up on its own. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, we're going to finish up building the reactors and then work on strengthening the wall because those biters are getting really annoying. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.